Well, good morning, everybody. Time for another Scottish adventure. Unfortunately, Molly is not with me this time. She's tucked up in bed. But I'm heading away to Angus, an amazing region that gets overlooked too often. It's got mountains, it's got the sea, it's got everything in between, and I'm going to show you some good snippets of it. Now, I'm actually away for 3 days on this trip, but I'm going to condense it all down for you. And actually, this trip is something I'm doing on behalf of the Angus Tourist Board, but this video is not part of it. So everything you see in this video is my take on things, unadulterated. So, anyway, enough yapping. Let's get going. Angus is a massive region on the east coast of Scotland, nestled between Aberdeenshire, Fife and Perthshire. It's got a lot to offer, and I was starting my journey across the Highland boundary line, heading towards the mountains through the Angus Glens. The drive through Glen Esk is one of my favourites, with beautiful scenery on all sides as you meander along the road. My first stop was somewhere I'm very familiar with, the Glen Esk Folk Museum, also locally known as The Retreat. In case you don't know me, my name is Graham, and I'm here to bring you Scotland's stories, from popular epic tales to the hidden histories, folklore and legends from around our wee country. If that sounds like something you might enjoy, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one. This collection was set up in the 1950s by a woman, Greta Meeke, who just realised that people were throwing things out. Life was changing, not just in Glen Esk, all across Scotland. And she decided to stop things from being lost by asking people to donate them. And the result is, quite frankly, an enormous collection for a remote local museum. It's incredible. There's more than just the mundane in this museum, though. There are some fascinating artefacts like these historic bagpipes or this 18th century basket-hilted sword. Now, where else are you going to find an 18th century sword alongside an ostrich egg? This is one of my favourite things in the museum. It's a story of just a local guy born in the 1880s, James Robert Gibb, and this is what it looked like. He lived here his whole life, but as a young man he had his leg amputated, and the operation, without any real anaesthetic or anything like that, somehow caused him to go deaf and mute. But he didn't let his disabilities hold him back. He would ride this bicycle around the glen, visiting lots of local ladies. Apparently he was a bit of a ladies' man. He was also a strong man. Doesn't look big, doesn't look like a big guy, but he could bend a 6-inch nail round back in itself, and anybody that visited him would be given a nail and set to the test. I don't know how many people beat him, but one of my favourite things about him is that he was always made sure he was dressed well. He was a very dapper gentleman, and as he got older and his hair started to go white, he would dye it with sheep dip to make it bright red again. Character. Honestly, you could spend a good bit of time here, and I find something new every time I visit, both inside and outside, exploring in the tool shed. This part of Angus, it still is very much farming area, farming community, and here some of the farming tools of the past. Some of them pretty obvious what they're for, like a turf cutter. There'll be peat cutting. There's peat cutting spades there. Some of them not always quite so obvious. Wooden flail. A club for stunning pigs. Who'd have thunk it?
I can't hang around the folk museum all day. I've got a schedule to keep to, so I drove as far along the glen as possible before a short hike took me past the ruins of Invermark Castle, silently guarding against the ghosts of Catalan raiders.
Invermark might seem like it's in a bit of a strange place, quite remote, quite empty, but actually, hundreds of years ago, this was like a highway here. It was incredibly busy. We were at the junction of 3 or 4 important routes through the Cairngorm Mountains. And the reason this is here, I mean, it's very obviously for one thing and one thing only: defence, you know. Very few windows. The door, that's the door up there. As you can see, you need a ladder to get in. It's here to defend against caterans, against cattle raiders, and it probably did quite a good job. I mean, how's this for defence? Nothing for you to break into on this side. Not unless you got a really tall ladder.
It's not a long hike on a good track before you reach the remains of an ancient church dedicated to St Drosten on the banks of Loch Lee. When I say on the banks, the water is literally lapping at the walls. This is one of my special quiet places, but I don't mind sharing it with you. It's even the cover of the Scotland Stories book, which I'll put a link to in the bio if you want to get your hands on a copy. Now, we don't have a lot of information about who Drosten was. Some sources claim him as a local Pictish saint, others as a Gallic prince who learned under Columba. What we can agree on is that he lived in Glen Esk as a hermit, dying in the 7th century. There's been a church on this very spot ever since, although the shell of this one dates from the mid-1600s. It's the kind of place you can feel swallowed up by history, in the peace and the quiet. There are some fascinating graves, many with the marks of memento mori, remember death. 2 of them are amongst my favourites anywhere, probably with the same person carving the symbols. They might be crude, but we know they did their best.
Yes, please. There's a hoose I would take. That's a jazzy looking horse. Glen Esk is a pretty special place. I come here at least a few times a year, and I always love it. What's amazing is that there's about 100 people, roughly, give or take a dozen, that live spread out along the glen, along this road these days. Now, there used to be around about 1,000, if not 2,000. This was a main route through the mountains. And just as life has changed, with the Highland clearances started things, but even after that, people not having jobs, you know, if you can't work from home, or you're not a farmer or a craftsperson, something like that, there's not a lot else on offer up here. These days, with people being able to work from home more, hopefully that encourages people to stay, younger people to stay, and make a life here, because these places need life again, not just tourism or hikers, you know. I think it's important anyway, in my opinion.
Usually I'd be annoyed by a diversion on the road, but instead of an inconvenience, let's see this as an opportunity to explore somewhere new.
Now, that detour is nothing to be annoyed about, because driving down a road I've never been before gives me the chance to find places like this that I've never seen before. This pretty little cemetery filled with snowdrops and what looks like possibly a standing stone.
My last walk of the first day was just on the outskirts of Edzell, through the Blue Door and into the woodlands beyond. This walk is known as the Rocks of Solitude, alongside the River North Esk. You can either just pop down to the viewpoint below the bridge, head a little bit along the way and back again, or go for an hour-long trek there and back. Winter rain and snow melt had turned a river from its usual gentle babble into a bit of a torrent in places.
Some people are clearly a lot braver than me. They're going down there and clambering along with just that rope all the way. I mean, it just keeps going. I'm not entirely sure where it stops. I think this bridge has maybe seen better days. I would not want to fall down there.
Eventually, you'll come to Dooley Tower, a folly in the woods that could be the perfect wee holiday home for me and Molly with a wee bit of work. And that's the sign to turn around and start heading back the way you came.
It's the start of my second day exploring round Angus, everything from the mountains to the sea, and I've come to a little nature reserve just outside Forfar, Merton. It's a great place for families. It's a great place to get in touch with nature. There's animals to rescue animals to see. Play with is probably the wrong word. But there's also a lot of just natural things. They've got badgers around here, pine martens, red squirrels, roe deer, lots and lots of birds. If you keep your eyes out, you never know what you're going to see. There's even ospreys that nest not too far away that fish here in the wee water bit. It was once a quarry, so it's amazing to see something like this be repurposed and reused. And yeah, as you go, I mean, here you go, bird watching. What? Information about the things you can see.
Just a few minutes from Merton, this is Resteneth Priory, and it might not look like much, but good things come in small packages. A priory is like an abbey, but a rung down the ladder. This one was Augustinian, and its mother house was Jedburgh Abbey, way down in the borders. Resteneth was founded by Malcolm IV in 1153, but it was already a very old church here. Allegedly one of the oldest stone churches in Scotland. You know that King Nectan of the Picts asked for help from Northumbrian stonemasons to build a church to St. Peter in the year 710? That was very possibly here. Like most religious houses, Resteneth was left to ruin after a religious reformation in the 16th century.
Resteneth was granted loads of really rich lands from around fertile Angus, and it became so wealthy, so important, that the annals of Iona were moved here in the 1100s to keep them safe from the Norwegians that had taken control of the west coast of Scotland. And then in the 1300s, Robert the Bruce buried his baby son John here. He was the twin brother of the future King David II. So this must have been a pretty important place by then.
At least it lasted a lot longer than Forfar Castle, somewhere that you can visit, but if you didn't know it was there, you would never find it. You need to head to the appropriately named Castle Street, pick the key up from Ali's newsagents, then head to this little black gate across the road on Canmore Street. Then do your best Rocky impression by running up these steps to Castle Hill.
Now it's quite windy up here, so hopefully you can hear me okay with this wee mic that I've maybe figured out how to use. But this was the site of the old Forfar Castle. It was probably the site of a Pictish stronghold first, and it would have probably been surrounded by Forfar Loch when that came out further. By the year 1000, it was, at least we know, it was a royal stronghold by then, and it was important enough for King Malcolm Canmore in the middle of the 11th century to call a parliament to meet here at Forfar Castle. Now, it was then fought over during the Scottish Wars of Independence, so that's the whole William Wallace, Robert the Bruce time, the late 1200s into the early 1300s, and it passed back and forth between English and Scots a few times, until eventually Robert the Bruce decided he had had enough and the castle was pulled down. It was destroyed and it was never rebuilt. But it didn't hold Forfar back. It became one of the wealthiest, most important towns in Scotland. It's the centre of all these roads around Angus that converge and meet here. It was already a royal borough, but in the middle of the 1600s, Charles II decided to re-establish its borough status, give it a new charter, and the market cross which I'm actually standing on top of. This is not part of the castle. Market Cross down in the town was built to commemorate it, which is why this has got symbols of Charles, King Charles II on it. The problem is that by the end of the 1700s it was decided that the Market Cross was just in the way, and to widen the roads it was dismantled and then built back up here on Castle Hill. And the steps are handy because it gives you this amazing view of around Forfar. Especially good at this time of year. I'm at the start of February, so there's not a lot of leaves on the trees, so I can see in every single direction, and you can see for miles. You know, especially if this was surrounded by the loch or even just boggy, marshy ground, you can see why it was an easily defended spot.
Managed to put my hand in bird poo on top of this thing. God damn it.
Leaving Forfar behind, I was heading back out to the Angus Glens to finish off my second day. This time it was Glen Isla, somewhere I'm very familiar with since my fiance's family farms up here, and I was stopped off on my way to somewhere that technically isn't Angus. This is Barry Hill, now a hill fort with a connection to the legends of King Arthur. I'll do a proper video about all of those legends and their Scottish origins soon, but I couldn't resist just stopping off to put the drone up and see what it looked like from the sky. This was the real goal, a walk alongside the River Isla.
I'm on the path above a big gorge, just walking to the viewpoint for the Reekie Linn. You can maybe hear it roaring away. One of the most impressive waterfalls in Scotland. And I know it pretty well, since this is actually my future father-in-law's farm that the waterfall is on. That's his field. So if you do see any sheep or cows while you're there, be very nice to them, or really just leave them alone. In April I'll be chasing the sheep around that field, probably. And I'm putting this in to see if my partner Emma actually watches any of my videos, because no doubt she'll shout at me for even mentioning her animals.
Reekie Linn means smoky pool, and on a day like this you can probably guess why. Legend says that a local outlaw hid down there in the Black Dub cave while being chased for murder. Then through the roar of the waterfall he heard a soft padding of feet behind him. It was an enormous black dog with fierce red eyes coming towards him through the darkness. It was the devil, there to claim his soul for his evil deeds. The criminal immediately scrambled out the cave, up the banks, and off to hand himself in to the authorities. Better to deal with them than Satan. That was enough excitement for one day. Time to rest up for the last bit of action.
Well, it's a bright, cold morning in Angus today. My last day on this wee trip, and I'm heading somewhere that's incredibly important to Scottish history. Somewhere every Scottish person, everybody with an interest in Scottish history should visit at least once. We're off to Arbroath. Well, I'm here somewhere pretty special today, Arbroath Abbey. Now, it was built in 1178 by William I, William the Lion, the reason we have the lion rampant on the Scottish royal flag. He dedicated it to Thomas Becket, who had been Archbishop of Canterbury, and William had actually known personally. He had made a saint very shortly after he had been murdered by supporters of King Henry of England. Now, William spent some time, he was captured by the English, spent some time in captivity down there, and when he came back, it wasn't long before he decided to build Arbroath Abbey and to dedicate it to this man who the King of England did not like very much. And I think there's a little bit of that decision was probably just to annoy Henry. Maybe I'm just being cynical. It's most probably where the altar would have been the high altar. I think this marks a spot where William was buried. Seagulls just have no respect for royalty.
The Declaration of Arbroath is something that definitely deserves its own video. As an overview, it was a letter written in 1320 from the barons of Scotland to the Pope, often called the greatest piece of medieval prose. King Robert the Bruce had won the Battle of Bannockburn 6 years earlier, but England still refused to acknowledge Scotland's independence, and now they were leaning on the Pope to get involved. In a nutshell, the letter declared the nation's independence, explained why Bruce was the rightful king, and stated the most famous part of it, probably, as long as 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honours that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone which no honest man gives up, but with life itself. Pretty powerful stuff. And it worked. We didn't get peace for another 8 years, but at least the Pope was now on our side, and this place is intrinsically linked with that letter. The visitor centre is brilliant. My favourite part was this interactive display, telling you who every seal belonged to and where they came from.
Now, the Declaration of Arbroath might be the big thing everybody knows about the Abbey, but I'm equally as interested in the Battle of Arbroath. In the middle of the 1400s, 1445, the Lindsays, well, it was the son of the Earl of Crawford, the Tiger Earl Beardy gets called sometimes, who had been in charge of justice on the Abbey lands, looking after things, but he was mischievous. He overstepped his thing. His men took privileges from the Abbey and the Abbey grounds and the Abbey lands. So, the monks at the Abbey, kicked him out and got the Ogilvies instead, took over. Now, the Ogilvies and the Lindsays, they did not get on particularly well, so it was the worst kind of slap in the face possible, and it led to a huge force of Lindsays following the son of the Earl of Crawford, batting down basically the gates here at Arbroath Abbey, and the Ogilvies, outnumbered, outmatched, outgunned, but they came out to fight anyway, and the two sides were facing off, shouting insults and screaming things at one another, but nobody really wanted to be the first one to charge in, you know, especially over something so stupid as this. Now, the Earl of Crawford, Earl Beardy's, well, the future Earl Beardy, his father, was racing here from Dundee, I think, and he arrived. He goes in between the two sides, arms waving, calling for peace. Now, one of the Ogilvies think that he is calling to attack, for the Lindsays to attack, and the Ogilvie throws his spear, plucks Earl Crawford from his saddle, kills him outright, and boom, that's it, the battle exploded. And it was brutal. The Ogilvies got absolutely thumped. They were basically chased right across Angus for miles and miles. But it all began right here, outside the gates, the doors of Arbroath Abbey.
There's more to Arbroath than just the Abbey. Head down to the pretty harbour and along to the signal tower, built 200 years ago to communicate with the Bell Rock Lighthouse around 11 miles offshore. The name actually comes from a bell that the Abbot of Arbroath is said to have fitted to the dangerous rock to try and warn ships away.
Now, the signal tower behind me was built to communicate with the Bell Rock Lighthouse, built way out, miles and miles offshore. Can't even see it without binoculars. But that was how they communicated. Now, they didn't have telephones or anything like that, so they would put flags and things up on that mast at the top of the signal tower, and it's said that when a lighthouse keeper who was out there doing his stint on the Bell Rock was expecting a child, if he looked back here with binoculars and he would see something flying up there that would tell him he'd had a wee kid, and if a dress was flying he'd had a wee girl, if trousers were flying he'd had a wee boy. The smell of all these creoles is quite pungent.
I wandered for about an hour around the town, past the oldest house there, built with stone stolen from the Abbey ruins, then to the fit of the tune, where the fishing community once thrived, and eventually to grab an Arbroath smoky for lunch. That's a traditional smoked haddock that can only be made within a few miles of Arbroath, but I was so hungry that I forgot to film any of it before stuffing my face.
The story goes that the people of Auchmithy were raided by Vikings a long time ago, and the homes were burned down. One of the homes had pairs of haddock hanging on the rafters, drying, and then when they went back to the wreckage and they found the fish smoked perfectly from the thing, they thought, oh, there's an idea, we should do this more often.
Now, I know that there are lots of amazing places in Angus that I didn't get to on this trip. Montrose, Glamis Castle, Kirriemuir, for example. But it would take me at least a week to get around everything, and a trip like this meant that my hands were tied. But it just means you'll have to subscribe to the channel to make sure you see those videos when I do get there.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed that wee tour around Angus. We packed a lot in from the mountains up at Glenesk to the sea here in Arbroath, and I am absolutely knackered. So anyway, if you did enjoy the video, I'd really appreciate if you could like it, if you could leave me a comment, let me know what you thought and where you want me to explore next. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the wee notification button so you get told when I've got something new up. I'm trying to get a new one out every week at the moment. Lots more to show you. So hopefully I'll see you the next time.